The Mariners are looking to fill their second base vacancy with internal candidates. By the way, if that's what they're doing, can you even call it a vacancy at that point? But there's limited free agent options anyway. There's limited trade options anyway. So do the Mariners have internal candidates that are better than what's available in free agency? Let's talk about it in just a moment. So the Mariners have started this offseason slowly. They haven't made big moves. In fact, the moves that they have made are mostly to I would say cut payroll, where the entire fan base seems to want them to add payroll. They non-tendered Josh Rojas, and that set up alarm bells because Adam Jude reported that doubled their payroll flexibility. Rojas was set to make about $8 million. And so everybody made the obvious. If that doubled it, that means that they now have $16 million to spend. $16 million does not really get you in the market for a guy like Alex Bregman. Doesn't really get you in the market for any of the top free agents, which means you're relegated to second and third tier free agents. And I think if there's anything worse than overspending on top free agents, it's probably spending on those second and third tier guys that are also approaching their 30s, that are also possibly out of their prime, that also probably aren't going to be efficient uses of money. And the Mariners just simply don't have the payroll to go out and fill. They don't have the payroll flexibility. You can feel however you want about the ownership group, right? I'm not here to tell you that you should think the Mariners are spending enough money. But we have to operate. Analysis has to operate in the confines of reality, and the reality is the Mariners are not going to spend more. Is it going to be $150 million? Whatever it's going to be, let's assume they have between $15 and $20 million to spend. That means one impact free agent at the absolute most. And it sounds like that person is not going to be a second baseman. And I'm going to tell you, I actually think this is the right call. If you're going to spend that money somewhere, I think it's the right call. I think that you have options. You have better options at third base in free agency. You have better options at third base in trade. You have better options in the outfield, for example, in free agency and trade. The option, I think, frankly, that the real second base option, the player that I have seen projected to the Mariners, unless you believe Alex Bregman is a second baseman, which, by the way, I'd be thrilled if the Mariners brought Alex Bregman in on a reasonable contract. And what is reasonable these days? Is it $160? I don't want him for 12 years or 11 years or whatever he's asking for. Supposedly, I heard he was asking for like 11 years, $330 million. I don't want Alex Bregman for that deal. Is $160? Is $200? Is that realistic? If the Mariners were willing to spend that much, fine. I'd be interested in that. I don't think they're going to spend that much, first off. And I don't know that Bregman would want to come here. I also don't know that I think he would see a pretty big drop-off in effectiveness. And there's other people that the Mariners may be interested in or that fans are interested in. Christian Walker's a guy that I know people are interested in. We can talk about that at another date. Let's talk about the second base candidates. And I suppose what we can start with is I put together this slideshow. That's always sexy, right? That's a sexy thing to say in the middle of a podcast. Is that or whatever we're doing here, a YouTube stream / podcast. So this is what the Mariners have on hand right now. They have Dylan Moore, who's signed for 2 more years at essentially $3 million a year, a little bit less than that, actually. I think he's a very good option, an underrated player, plays a bunch of different positions, can play shortstop, can play second base, hits actually pretty well. WRC plus for Dylan Moore in 2025, 105 WRC plus. His defensive value, 1.6 runs above average. He plays a bunch of positions, plays a quality second base, plays a quality enough shortstop. I think the one thing I will say about Dylan Moore is if you say Dylan Moore is going to be my everyday second baseman, you lose the flexibility of Dylan Moore playing a bunch of positions, right? So is Dylan Moore the guy that you want to just sit? You want to rest on him for all of 2025? I don't think so. In fact, I think the Mariners made a huge mistake when they signed Sean Figgins and then went third baseman. Not to say that Sean Figgins would have been different or better or even would have signed in Seattle if they were like, you're going to be a utility player or you're going to be a second baseman. But the requirements for an offensive second baseman to be league average are significantly less than a third baseman. So I do think there's downside to making Dylan Moore the everyday second baseman. So let's look at the other options that are available internally. I think Dylan Moore is a known quantity, and I think he's an underrated quantity. He's a very good player who plays a bunch of positions. He's a known quantity, and if that's the guy, I can accept it. I'm not going to be happy about it because you lose all the other things that make Dylan Moore the kind of value that's in the shadows and in the corners and on the fringes of Dylan Moore's game, which I think I'm saying the utility thing is on the fringes because I think he's actually a good hitter. I think he's actually a good fielder. I think he could actually be a league average second baseman pretty easily. Let's talk about a couple more guys. So Ryan Bliss is another guy that folks are talking about. I like Ryan Bliss a ton, by the way. I think that he was a great upside. I believe he came in the Paul Sewald trade along with Josh Rojas and who else? God, who was the other guy? Because at one point I remember they had all three guys on the roster at the same time. There were points last year. Ryan Bliss, one, just incredibly exciting to watch. Obviously super fast. When he's on base, he's very exciting. In the minors, he was a guy who walked a bunch, who hit for a little bit of power, who had somewhat limited strikeouts. And in the pros, which is often the case for these kind of quad A, undersized guys that are putting up numbers in the minors, those strikeout and walk numbers kind of invert as they come to the majors. We've seen it with a bunch of dudes that have had this happen. Guys who are like just genuine quad A's. I'm not convinced Ryan Bliss isn't a quad A guy yet. I think he's got a bunch of upside, but like, yeah, this could be what you get. Is a guy who's like, so he had a 101 WRC plus last year, but in only 71 plate appearances. I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background, by the way. We got a delivery occurring in my house right now as we speak. So because of that, I put on Ryan Bliss's projected WRC plus, which is Steamer and the FGDC projections of Fangraphs. And he's projected for a 94 WRC plus. And is that good? No. Is that acceptable this would make, if you give him slightly positive defense, slightly below average offense, that puts Ryan Bliss at about a league average second baseman. And I want you to keep that in mind. A league average second baseman, because there are options that the Mariners have to sign free agents, but they are not necessarily that much better than league average. So some people are just hell-bent on the Mariners need to go spend. They need to go trade prospects. I think it's important to say, what are you getting in return? And it's not the full added value of a league average second baseman. You're getting the difference between what that guy is and who you already have on the roster. And I'm open to the argument that Dylan Moore should be part of that equation in that, like, I'm open to either side. If this guy's your starting second baseman, then that guy's got to be that much better than Dylan Moore. I'm also willing to consider him as a super utility guy, move him out of the conversation, and just talk about the following two guys. One of those guys is Ryan Bliss, and the other guy is Cole Young, one of the Mariners' top prospects, one of the top prospects in baseball. A ton to like about Cole Young. Left-handed hitting, really low strikeout rates, decent walk rates in the minors, but of course those things tend to invert on guys who aren't big power hitters. Cole Young, not a big power hitter so far. Is the potential there? Absolutely, and especially a guy that's going to hit left-handed in Safeco Field or whatever you call it now, T-Mobile Park. Will I ever get that right? Will I ever make that full conversion in my mind? I don't know. In my mind, it's still Safeco Field, by the way. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I can't call it. In my mind, I'm always calling it Safeco Field. However much I mess up on this podcast, 100% of the time in my mind, I'm calling it Safeco Field. Yeah. So Cole Young is projected for a 93 WRC plus and a to be slightly above average defensively also. Some of this stuff is just saying, like, if this guy is an entry-level major leaguer, we're going to regress back to what we think an entry-level second baseman will do. So I wouldn't take a whole ton of I would suspect it is the mean is the average second baseman, and it's not necessarily a reflection on Cole Young. And I think that for some people, especially what we've heard in the recent years, Cole Young making a 2025 debut seems it seems like too quick. Fangraphs has his estimated debut in 2025. I don't know if that's changed, but he would be making his debut as, very likely, if he makes it before the trade deadline, essentially, he'd be a 21-year-old, which would be, that's an aggressive timeline. That's an aggressive timeline for a guy you drafted late in the first round out of high school. But I think that this is where, to me, Cole Young offers the greatest variability, and I mean that in a positive way, because there's very little chance, in my opinion, that Ryan Bliss comes in and is like something better, so much better than we thought. We've seen a half a decade out of Ryan Bliss in the minors. We've seen part of a season with the Mariners. Ryan Bliss has an incomplete game. Is he going to come in and be, I think he's useful. I think he's a useful player on this team, but is he going to be a guy that comes in and he's posting a 130 WRC plus and plus defense out of nowhere? I don't think so. Could Cole Young be that guy? I think it's possible. He hasn't really shown he hasn't shown a ton of power in the minors, but he's literally a growing boy. And then also there's just a ton of variability. And this is all to say, by the way, variability to me is positive because it means you have an option that has a ton of upside, along with this option in Ryan Bliss that I think has for 2025, a lower ceiling, and if not a higher floor. I actually don't know that he has that much higher of a floor, but he has a floor that does not include ruining a top prospect's psyche. So you're less worried about him flaming out in the majors. And that's inhumane. It might sound inhumane. It's the reality. You're not worried about Ryan Bliss not fulfilling his potential because you think his potential is significantly lower than Cole Young. So you go, come in, be that guy right now, Ryan Bliss. I would not be unhappy to see the Mariners go in with an open mind and go into spring training with an open mind where Cole Young or Ryan Bliss could win that job and bump Dylan Moore back to an everyday utility guy, by the way. Like an everyday utility guy. Not a super sub, not a backup, an everyday utility guy. A guy that takes meaningful games at third base, second base, shortstop, and in the outfield. If Dylan Moore is ever DHing for this team, that's a bad sign also. So Cole Young is interesting, high upside. But I want to talk about the guys that are actually available to play second base that are not named Alex Bregman that I think are on the top of people's minds. And the first one is Gleyber Torres. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think Torres is one of the worst possible options available. First off, his offensive numbers are greatly inflated by Yankee Stadium. He is not going to be that guy if he comes to Seattle. If Gleyber Torres is the exact same player as he is right now, if he plays exactly as well, his numbers will be significantly worse in Seattle. The park factor cannot be underestimated when it comes to a guy like Gleyber Torres, who, despite having one really good year, which, by the way, go look at his stats, one really good year, Gleyber Torres would come to Seattle and be a disappointment. There's almost no doubt in my mind. His estimated contract is 2 years, $36 million, so $18 million annual average. That's the whole budget on a guy that's like going to come in and be Dylan Moore, but worse. Dylan Moore with bad defense, Dylan Moore with the same offense, Dylan Moore on a guy who's got expectations that are kind of through the roof because he comes with that prospect pedigree and he comes with a reputation as a guy who played for the Yankees and who has put up, like, by traditional numbers, pretty respectable numbers, 25 home runs as a second baseman in 2023. How many of those are home runs in T-Mobile Park? By the way, big dip in 2024, 15 home runs, but the average drops, the on-base percentage drops, the power overall drops. So a guy that goes from a 180 isolated power to a 121 isolated power, how much worse is that in T-Mobile Park? How close are you to, and also a guy, by the way, that's going to be 28 years old when Dylan Moore is entering his, I think his age 30 season. So it's not like Gleyber Torres is 24 years old and you can get a whole bunch of Dylan, I was wrong. Dylan Moore is going to be, he's entering his age 32 season technically, but he's like the oldest you could possibly be. I believe the quote unquote year age that you are cuts off at July 31st. That's it. So this is an interesting, nobody's going to care about this, by the way. This is a diversion that nobody wants to care, or nobody will care about. Freakonomics. One of the things they talked about in Freakonomics is that hockey players in Canada, their birthdays are concentrated just after the age cutoff for Little League hockey. When I was a kid, and presumably when Dylan Moore was a kid, the age cutoff for hockey or for baseball was July 31st. Dylan Moore born August 2nd. So presumably throughout his entire youth baseball career, he was one of the oldest kids at his level, which is interesting to me, and no one else is going to care about it. But so Dylan Moore is a couple years older, but is on a contract that's literally $30 million cheaper. That's $15 million cheaper. So like, if Gleyber Torres is going to take a single plate appearance away from Dylan Moore, I'm against signing Gleyber Torres. Period. End of story. That's my answer on Gleyber Torres. I'm out on Gleyber Torres. People would be excited because of the prospect pedigree, because he's under 30. I would not be. I would not be excited at all. I also wouldn't be surprised. I'd be unsurprised by either of these two things, by the way. I'd be unsurprised by Gleyber Torres signing a 3 or 4 or 5 year deal, and I'd also be unsurprised by him signing a 1-year prove it deal somewhere and then not proving it, by the way. I'm not in on Gleyber Torres. I don't know if you could state that any more clearly. Nico Horner is another guy that people have been talking about a lot. I would say like, I'm more excited about Nico Horner than I am about Gleyber Torres. The problem, of course, there's a couple problems with Nico Horner, by the way. He makes money already. He's already going to be due $11.5 million next year, so that's a huge chunk of the budget. That's your one big acquisition. If you're going to get one big acquisition and you have $18 million of budget to do it, that's it. That's the end. What I like better about Horner, I think Horner is an equally good hitter to Torres, or probably will be going forward. They're both entering their age 28 seasons. By the way, Horner is on the other side of the deadline spectrum. He was born in May. I was born in June, by the way, so that's why it's always on my mind. I like to have anything to blame me not becoming a professional athlete on is I'm willing to do it. So that's why. It's because I was born so late. I was one of the youngest baseball players at my level every year. It wasn't because I threw 81 miles an hour at my peak and because I was 5'11" and slow with no power. It wasn't because of any of those things, simply because I was born in June and didn't get all the opportunities that I would have if I was older and old for my level. Horner's like a very good defensive second baseman. Probably could handle some shortstop. He did earlier in his career. Low strikeout rate, acceptable, respectable walk rate. Not a ton of power. And again, is that power going to translate? He's a 103 isolated power for his career. How much worse is that outside of Wrigley Field and at T-Mobile Park? How many of his 29 career home runs, by the way, it's like findable information. I could be finding it. I could have found it before I came on here. But how many of his 29 career home runs are not home runs at T-Mobile Park? But that being said, a dude that's been worth 4.3, 4.6, and 3.9 wins above replacement the last 3 years, this is probably legitimately the best player in this group that we're talking about. If Cole Young turned into a 4-win player, you are thrilled. That is a great outcome for Cole Young. So, but Horner is 28. He's got 2 years left on his contract before he becomes a free agent. And he's already making $11.5 million a year. So is that the guy? Is that the option that the Mariners, if again, it's your one move, it probably does not improve your offense very much, if at all. And it's worth talking about. Horner is coming off of right elbow surgery. So whatever you make of that, he's a second baseman. Doesn't need to exactly be firing the ball across the diamond, but maybe takes that shortstop flexibility out for at least a year. Anyway, another option that folks have talked about is Isaac Paredes, who I would say at the minimum, I am skeptical that Isaac Paredes is anything but a third baseman. He is 25 years old. What did he get traded for? That's actually, I meant to look that up before I came on here. Let's look at see if we can find his transaction history real quick. So he got traded to the Cubs last season. Around the deadline, around the same time as the Mariners traded for Randy Arozarena, and was another guy that I thought made some sense for them at the time. Can we get to transactions quickly? I don't know. We're going to try our best. We'll go to Baseball Reference. That's a little bit easier. Isaac Paredes projected 2025 arbitration number is $6.9 million. That would be something that he could end up on either side of, but it's probably a decent it's a decent estimation. And then we'll look at, so the Rays in exchange for Paredes got a prospect, Ty Johnson, not a top 100 prospect. Though you never trust the Rays, those sneaky Rays. Not a top prospect, but a guy that got drafted in the 15th round of the 2023 draft. So Hunter Bigi, I think we're going to call him. Reliever, fringe reliever, pitched in the minors or pitched in the majors a little bit the last couple of years. And then who else? Who's our other guy? Oh, Chris Morel, who is, I think was like a legit player at some point, right? Was he ever a top prospect? Was Chris Morel ever a top 100 prospect? I don't think so. He's so I mean, I would say like not exactly. The Cubs didn't exactly give up a ton. For whatever reason, Paredes doesn't seem to have a ton of value around the league. And so if you could get Paredes for like what I think would be a reasonable return, he might be the guy I'm the most interested in, period. A guy that I think you would have fill that third base spot, right? That you would opt against signing a player. Paredes would be interesting. There's some he's played a little bit of second base. He actually, by the way, he's played about 500 innings of second base and has been roughly average. And that's after, by the way, by UZR 150 standards, putting up just an absolutely horrendous first year playing second base. Like a negative 30 runs per 150 games first season. And so maybe there's some untapped potential there. Maybe there's something that I'm not considering. Maybe Paredes is a little more valuable. Anyways, my point is I don't think that the Mariners need to make an addition at this position. I don't think that it's. I don't think there's great options out there. That's part of it. It's not that the Mariners have done some amazing thing to create depth in their organization. It's that this is a weak position in this year's free agent class. And so should the Mariners go out and overspend on a guy like Gleyber Torres to add another league average-ish second base option that's right-handed with marginal power that's going to come to Seattle and probably, severely underperform his career averages? There's almost no doubt about that. Or should they go after a third baseman? I like the idea of Luke Raley being the large side of a platoon at first base. Is a right-handed first base platoon guy? That's got to be a guy that's like reasonably available. So to me, I think that committing to not adding a second baseman through free agency. One guy I didn't talk about, by the way, is Willy Adames, who's a shortstop from Milwaukee. One, he will probably sign for a bigger deal than the Mariners want to sign. A player or two, but two, I think it's just unrealistic. The guy probably is going to want 10 years also. And I just don't think he's a great fit in Seattle. I don't want the Mariners to go spend $200+ million on a right-handed hitter that I don't think is gonna translate to T-Mobile Park. So that's where I'm at. Interested to hear what you have to say. By the way, please come see me on Friday. Tomorrow, I am at the Everett Improv. I think it's just called the Everett Improv. I think if you Google Everett Improv, by the burp right in the mic, that's nice. If you Google Everett Improv, I'm headlining a show out there tomorrow at 8 o'clock. On Sunday, I am opening on a brunch show, by the way, which I love brunch shows. I absolutely love brunch shows. And on a brunch show, I will be opening for my buddy Gabriel Rutledge, who's filming a crowd work special at Tacoma Comedy Club's 6th and Proctor location, which is where I recorded my special, by the way. So come out for that, and then go to CaseyMcLeanComedy.com to see where I'm going to do comedy. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you later.